find you all well. As Alan says, I'm a pig specialist at Harper Adams, and I teach an awful lot of students pigs. My background is very much pig production, pig management, and before going to Harper, I was at SAC as a pig advisor. So I hope this brings together quite a lot of my experiences. That's what I want to try and do today, is bring a few experiences into this into the talk, so that you know, you get a good I can't think of the word, but you know, you get my experience rather than just a list of do's and don'ts. So in terms of weaning, we've got to set ourselves objectives. The main objectives that I would put across would be to maximize the weaning weight. Okay, if we're going to wean the pig well, we need a good weaning weight. We generally target sort of 8 kilos at 26 days. That would be a good target, I think, nationally. The Harper unit is currently doing about 9 kilos in that sort of time, but 8 is good. We want to reduce the weaning stress. We want to make the pig uncomfortable. We want to make sure that it doesn't go through the growth drop that we often see post-weaning. We want to maximize the post-weaning performance, not just after weaning, but also right through to slaughter. You know, I've got some data to show you that small differences right at the beginning can make big differences as we go through to slaughter. We want to obviously maintain health. We can't wean a pig such that it's going to get sick, and therefore maximize our also minimize, I should say, our post-weaning mortality. And then finally, we've got to think about what the sow is doing. Weaning is also about the sow and making sure that she gets back pregnant again. And so one of our objectives has to be to try and do whatever we do that enables her to maximize her efficiency. Okay, in terms of weaning weight, I'll start with that one first. We have a genetic capability. You will know what your pigs will do, your particular line, breed, whatever. Okay, and the idea there is to understand what the capability is and make sure that you're achieving at least that. Once we've got our genetic capability, we can then have a bit more flexibility. How do we manage that capability? Okay, and I got 3 points to make, really. Fostering to teat capacity, making sure that every piglet that's born has a teat, okay, and Richard would have gone through some of these things in the last webinar, okay, in terms of what to do during lactation. Okay, every pig's got to have a teat. Feeding the sow to maximize milk production. Milk production is like a curve, like cows and everything else. Okay, there is a peak lactation, occurs at around week 2 to week 3, and some sows will be producing over 30 litres a day at a 20% dry matter. So there's a lot of milk coming out of a sow, and the sow has to be fed appropriately. And then finally, once the pig has once the sow has reached her maximum milk production, then post that, the demand from the litter is likely to go above that. And so once that starts to happen, we need to start supplementary feed, creep feeding, and possibly milk from birth as well. Okay, so this little graph here demonstrates, you know, approximately when the sow's maximum milk yield is achieved, around 3 to 4 weeks, but post that, the piglet demand for growth is higher than her production, and if we're going to stop her from losing too much weight and going out of condition, then we need to make up the difference, and the difference between the demand and the supply, if you like, is the creep feeding. So those are some of the basic management capabilities that we've got to manage. And finally, in terms of weaning weight, how do we maximize weaning weight through health? Well, there's two ways we want to concentrate on. We need to reduce the challenge, okay? The disease challenge, how animals get sick, and then we want to increase the defense mechanism of the piglet if it does get challenged. So there's two ways we can look at health. Okay, and in whatever scenario, we want to maximize our health and not have disease. So reducing challenges is all about hygiene, okay? Putting those weaned pigs into a clean environment, making sure they're healthy and hygienic through lactation, okay? vaccinating the piglet as required, depending on your veterinary advice, vaccinating the sows so they're not passing on disease, worming the sows so they're not passing on disease in the lactation. And finally, reducing challenge through good environment, warm, dry, clean, and everything else that goes on with that, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. If we want to increase the defence of an animal, though, we've got to think about the colostrum. We've got to make sure that every piglet gets that colostrum in the first couple of days. Okay, so we want split suckling, we want all the methods that perhaps Richard talked about a month or so ago. We then want to concentrate also on the nutrient intake, not just of the litter, but of the individual. We've got to look at the individual and make sure that all the individuals are getting that colostrum and getting the good milk access. So all of those things come together and end up with a weaning weight. And to be honest, the better the weaning weight, the better the pig's going to perform post-weaning. Okay, so that's the first major message. In terms of that health issue, okay, this sort of diagram gives us the sort of demonstrates why we need that colostrum. The piglet, when it is born without an immune system. The immune system only gets going after about 2 to 3 weeks, and then it only gets going slowly. So if the piglet doesn't get the colostrum, it has a major immunity gap, okay, and it's very vulnerable. And then when we start to think about weaning it at, say, 3-4 weeks, you've got this immunity gap right there, right in your face, saying, hey, this is a vulnerable pig, and if you challenge it with bugs and you make it difficult for it, its immunity is going to be at a low ebb. It's going to be low, and therefore is likely to get disease, okay? So what we need to do in terms of our management is to maximize the colostrum, the colostrum part of that graph, and also stimulate the pig's own immunity to occur and get strong earlier, okay? But if you look at that graph, you can see that 3 weeks is absolutely right in the middle of where this immunity gap might be. So you might say, well, 3 weeks, the pig's quite vulnerable. 4 weeks, it's okay. 5, 6, 8 weeks, whatever, okay? And that graph actually explains why the EU government has a regulation on weaning age at 3 weeks. They recommend that weaning a pig should be done at 4 weeks, but you can wean 7 days earlier, i.e. 21 days at 3 weeks, if you're weaning them into a clean environment, okay? So they set the bar at 4 weeks, and they allow you to go earlier by 7 days if you're putting the pigs into a clean environment with the appropriate diets, okay? So that sort of explains where that legislation sort of comes from. Moving on, we want to improve performance by having good weaning weight, and this is a classic graph showing just that. Weaning weights here, just get rid of that. Just move that down out of the way. Here we have weaning weights of 6 kilos. This is all Harper data, 6 kilos, 7.8 kilos, and 9 kilos. And you can see right from the start, the bigger pigs grow. Okay, I'll get this pointer on. They grow, and so when they get to slaughter 120 days later, they're looking at 110 kilos, whereas the smaller ones, you're looking at less than 80 kilos. So, right from the word go, getting a better weaning weight is going to give you better performance. And the rule of thumb here is 1 extra kilo at weaning gives you an extra 7 to 10 days less time to slaughter at a fixed slaughter weight. So again, just emphasizing the importance of weaning weight as a long-term stress. In terms of weaning stresses, what are they? Everybody talks about the stress of weaning. Well, what I try and do is I split it down into elements, and I think about each element at a time. And this is how we tend to analyze systems. So the main stresses for me at weaning are mixing the piglet, moving the piglet to a new environment, taking the mother away, breaking that social contact, and a diet change. Okay, we do all 4 of those all on the same day. Okay, and it's a rather abrupt when you're talking about an indoor unit. Okay, you've got to remember an indoor sow that's been in a farrowing crate, the piglets have not been more than a foot away from the sow for the first 4 weeks of their lives. Okay, they've never mixed with any other pigs. So all of those things are all coming as a bit of a shock. Okay, if we consider outdoor, however, then the process and transition is rather more spread out. Outdoor pigs tend to jump out of the ark, mix with other piglets prior to weaning. They certainly experience different environments, day, night, wind, weather, rain. Okay, so they understand different environments and moving and different places. They understand that mother does go away from them every so often and lies in the wallow or whatever before she comes back. And they also have a relatively drawn out diet change because the piglets are starting to eat soil and other things they get from the environment, and that's going to modify their gut. So I would argue that the outdoor pig is smaller at weaning because of the experiences it has had, the challenges it has had, but it has had those life experiences and it will wean better. The check it gets at weaning isn't going to be quite as strong. Okay, so the weaning process is a transition. It needs to be managed. Okay, and the idea is we minimize this post-weaning growth check. Okay, so this graph is some data I took from a trial that we did a few years ago, and what I've got here is a graph where I want to concentrate on these 2 lines, the pink one and the brown one. Those are my 2 treatments. These were 2 treatments where we were creep feeding the piglet different creep foods. The first point to make is both of these lines are above the standard. So that red, blue and green lines, they're just drawn on the graph to show, you know, average, low and good. Okay. The point being is both my creep treatments were in the good category. These were both good diets. Okay. And what we did in this trial was we fed these 2 different creeps from there to there at weaning. That's all. All we did was 2 different creep diets available to the piglets and then weaned them. Okay. The graph then shows that both those groups, you can't see the pink and the brown now, they're both on top of each other. That was because there was no actual weight at weaning difference between the 2 treatments whatsoever. We then see that line level off a little bit, and that's what we call the weaning check. So they stop growing, well, they grow slower straight after weaning, and then they start to get better and better, and they grow faster and faster. And then you start to see these 2 lines coming apart. The only real difference started to show itself at the nursery exit around day 49, and there was a kilo difference between those 2 treatments. But by the time we got up to this end, it was 4 kilos different, okay? And that's a huge amount of money. That's £5 a pig difference in terms of income. And the only investment that we made into those 2 treatments was back here. The pink line was 50 pence worth of the cost of the creep feed was higher. So we invested an extra 50 pence here, and we get an extra £5 all the way back there. So this is a classic sort of thing that we see when we're doing trials, is you don't necessarily see the impact at weaning straight away, but the whole point is that the better you can keep the gut of the pig, the more healthy you can get the gut of the pig, you then see a long-term benefit, and in this case, you know, right through to slaughter. Currently, hopefully you can see the bottom bit there, the Harper Adams, we're currently getting between 300 and 500 grams per piglet of creep feed into them before we're weaning them. So that's the sort of level that I'd expect you to try and get to if you're weaning your pig at 26 days. And again, just to highlight this weaning check, here's some more data from my unit. Here we have data just from earlier this year, April. We did some trials and we looked at the small pigs, the medium-sized pigs and the large pigs. So here we have some weaning weights, 6 kilos, 8 kilos and 10.5 kilos. And the interesting bit comes down a bit lower. So this row here is the daily gain of piglets just prior to weaning. So the small piglets were growing 200 grams a day, and not surprisingly, the large piglets were growing at 345 grams a day in the 7 days or 8 days just before weaning. If we compare those growth rates with this row of growth rates, these were the growth rates of those same pigs in the 7 days post-weaning. So these guys were doing 187 grams a day, 166, so they actually went lower than the small ones, and 187 there. The point is, these guys went down at weaning by 8%, whereas these guys, wow, 46% lower growth rate in the 7 days post-weaning as opposed to pre-weaning, okay? So, you know, this really does highlight, you know, the fact that those really big stonking pigs that are doing really, really well on mum do get a massive check, you know? And the basic thing is, it's all about food intake. Their food intake drops away to very low levels and they stop growing, okay? Whereas those little guys, you know, these guys, why are they little? Well, they're probably little because they've struggled to get mother's milk, okay? They might be on the worst teat, or worse still, they might not be on a teat at all. They might be thriving on the creep feed. Okay, we can't speculate on that, but the point is they only went backwards by 8%. Okay, so those guys are sort of, it would suggest to me that they're actually, you know, halfway through weaning by the time you actually get to wean them because of the conditions that they're actually trying to grow in during lactation. Okay, so it really does, I think, highlight that we at weaning, it's not just little ones we want to look after. We want to look after all of the pigs because it's having a big effect on all of the animals. Okay, and when I first got that graph, I was quite astounded at that one. So weaning is a transition. It's a transition in physiology. It's a transition in behavior. Okay, so if I just think about the physiological aspects of what's happening, here I've got pre-weaning column and post-weaning. Pre-weaning, liquid milk. The piglet's got liquid milk, 20% dry matter, and we're going to dry feed and water post-weaning. Before weaning, the piglets are getting a highly digestible lactose, animal protein and fats, highly digestible. Whereas the post-weaning, we're looking for starch and plant proteins, less digestible. So the whole digestion system has changed. The enzymes, excretions have to change. They go from lactase to amylase. And again, that's fine, but it doesn't happen overnight. So it's got to be a controlled way of moving from changing the secretions in the gut from the lactase over to the amylase. And the same story with the microflora, you know, loads of lactobacillus in the gut, pre-weaning, okay. Then what happens is the piglet stops eating for a few days, the gut literally empties itself, and then when the animal does start eating again, the gut population, the gut fills itself, and then the bacterial population comes in and changes. Now, if in that process you take in a whole bunch of pathogenic bacteria, then that's going to cause the pig a lot of issues, okay? So hence the cleanliness of the environment on the day of weaning and the day after, okay? You've got to get this animal so there's no bacterial challenge, so that while it's going through this process of emptying the gut and starting again, that it doesn't then go and get sick and get some sort of serious diarrhea. And then finally, what happens down the gut, the histology of the villi, you get long, thin villi. And what happens, I don't know what you see, but if you imagine my fingers as the villi in the gut, okay, this is what they look like pre-weaning. Post-weaning, within a few days, they look like that. You know, they literally halve in height, okay? They go from long, thin to real short stumpy. Okay, so my next slide sort of demonstrates that a little bit. There's a couple of slides of villi in the gut. And so this is the lining of the gut, so that, oops, oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. Okay, the lining of the gut. Okay, so here is where the food is. Here's the lumen, and here's the gut, and here's the absorption. So these villi are all really long and thin, massive surface area, absorbing all that milk. All the proteins and all the nutrients within the milk all get digested really, really well. And there's another shot a bit lower down the gut, again with really nice structures and really long villi. And then weaning comes along, and then that's what we see. Okay, and what we see here is a shortening of all these villi. The crypts become deeper, but the villi get really short and stubby, and the surface area goes down. So immediately you're stopping absorption of nutrients. The surface area goes down. More importantly, though, this is what happens. You get damage to this, what we call the epithelial lining. And you can see here, just here, you know, there's a gap there. A couple of cells have died, and in that gap, bacteria can then enter into the animal. Okay, so you know, these what we call lesions on the epithelium, this is just like cutting your skin. So when you cut your skin, you bleed, and then bacteria can get in the lesion and in the scar, and then what happens is this sort of heals itself, and you get the equivalent of scar tissue. So when this damage occurs, you are permanently damaging the absorption capacity of the animal, so you're going to affect its performance all the way through its life, but also you are allowing the fact that bacteria can enter the body, and then the piglet then has to think, oh my God, I've got to get rid of all of this lot, and then the immune system has to jump in and start clearing the blood of all this challenge of bugs. And it's all about this sort of damage that happens to the gut, and that happens at weaning. Okay, so it's really quite, if you can get your head around that, it really does explain why we see, you know, problems in young pigs soon after weaning if they're put in poor environments. Okay, so I've talked a lot about feed so far, and that is the main issue in a lot of cases, getting the food into the piglet. Okay, keeping the continuity of a good diet into the piglet throughout this transition of weaning. So I'm going to consider, obviously feed and water is important, but also you need a nice clean environment and everything else I'll come on to later. So water and feed. The next question I want to put into people's minds is this idea of voluntary food intake. Okay, the piglet does not sit there thinking, I'm going to eat because the farmer needs me to eat because I've got to grow. Okay, the voluntary food intake is a choice. The pig decides if it wants to eat. Okay, and the factors affecting voluntary food intake, you can start off with, say, palatability. Does it taste nice? Is it sweet? Okay, do I want to eat it? Is the question. The next sort of point to make is my gut big enough? Do I have the capacity to take in this food and these nutrients to give me what I need to grow? If it's not, if the animal's small and it doesn't take in very much volume, then the diet has to be high density, it has to be good quality. I'm talking, you know, 24% protein here. I'm talking about 1.6% lysine. You've got a really dense packet of nutrients that even if the animal doesn't eat very much, in terms of capacity, it gets the nutrients it needs. Okay, so that's really important. The other thing to consider is access, okay, and format. Access, you can see in this picture here, you know, these feeders, loads of access, pigs can go and get the food, and that's not a problem. But if you imagine a little piglet that can't, you know, tries to go to an Adelaide popper and there's a big bully pig in front of it, it doesn't necessarily get access. And as I said earlier, if it gets pushed away from the feeder, it doesn't necessarily try again. It just says, oh, well, you know, I'll just do without that food for a while. And then the format, okay? I've said before that the mother's milk is 20% dry matter, Okay, it's in a liquid base. Okay, and then we're moving the piglet to solid food. Just as a rule of thumb, 1 kilo of dry feed, the pig would need to eat 2.5 to 3 litres of water. So for every kilo of food eaten, they need that amount of water, and therefore we've got to have a good supply of water. If we don't supply the water, they won't eat the food. Okay, so a lot of weaning systems actually revolve around wet feeding and gruel feeding, which we'll perhaps come on to. In terms of what do pigs eat, okay, that's a sort of average daily feed intake that we generally see, 0 to 7 days post-weaning, 100 grams a day, running up to sort of 300 to 400 grams a day by the time they get to 3 weeks post-weaning. I looked at some Harper data this morning, and the individual variance within a group, in the group I was looking at, went from 50 grams a day per pig, because we were measuring individual food intake, up to 300 grams a day. So, you know, there's a massive, within that 115 to 160 grams average, there is a massive variance. And 50 grams a day intake of feed is not enough for the animal to grow. In fact, when you actually look at growth rates of newly weaned pigs, you often find they lose weight in the first 7 days. So again, I've seen data where some pigs have grown at 360 grams a day, and some pigs have lost 50 grams a day. So it's a massive variance, and what we've got to do is try and find those individuals and look after the individual. I've talked about the nutrition and the feeding. What the other transition that happens at weaning is behaviour. Okay, so prior to weaning, there are 30 meals a day. Every 40 minutes, the sow suckles and the piglets come. Okay, post-weaning, okay, they are just feeding bouts, and they start to develop a very strong, what we call diurnal pattern of feeding behaviour. I'll talk about that in a minute. Pre-weaning, all pigs feed at the same time, i.e. you've got 1 piglet per teat, and they all come up together, they all eat together, feed together, and they have it for a minute or two, and then it's all gone, and then 40 minutes later they come up again. That is very different from post-weaning, where the pigs are expected to use an ad-lib feeder. Do they use it? Do they bother to use it? Are they stimulated to go to the ad-lib feeder? Do all the other pigs go to the ad-lib feeder at the same time, just like they used to do when I was on mum? Okay, these are the sorts of questions that you want to sort of think about as you're watching your pigs. Unrestricted access to feed. Okay, so what I'm saying there, pre-weaning, is that as long as every piglet has a teat, and that's the important thing, as long as every piglet has a teat, there shouldn't be any problem with access to feed. Whereas post-weaning, there is always a competitiveness to it. There's always a competitiveness. And then finally, there's a high intake of food pre-weaning, or the post-weaning, not so high intake. So we're thinking about this weaning process as a transition of feed type. Okay, you know, Quality Equipment have got this machine. There are others, but this sort of takes the science and tries to apply what we're trying to achieve. So what we've got here is the machine. It's got dry food in here. It mixes it with a stirrer with water at the bottom here, and so out comes a gruel. So that's the first thing. We're not just going from mother's milk to solid dry food. This part of the machine at the top controls the times that this happens, so it can happen whatever times you set it. So it's a bit like, you know, piglet suckling. You can have it feeding the pigs 20 times a day, 30 times a day, or just twice a day. Okay, so you're transitioning the animal from many feeds a day to slightly less, you know, a lot less numbers of times they go and feed, and you're changing them from the sort of milk liquid based type format to the solid based type format. Okay, so that's the transition feeder. But if you can think how you feed your pigs, and if you can get that transition perhaps in a manual way, you know, you could just as easily have your dry feeder in the pen and put in a little bowl of milk 2 or 3 times a day, and then slowly after a few days take that away. But it's this transition, allowing the pig's gut to change and getting the behavior to change. And this diagram is an absolute typical diurnal pattern of feeding behavior. So again, here's some data I picked up from work, and you can see, you know, during the night time, the behavior of feeding of the pigs, I'll just follow the orange line for now, was low. And then in the morning, at 8 o'clock, they have a peak in eating and feeding behavior. Then they have another peak in 5 o'clock-ish, early evening, and then again it drops off. And again, you might say, oh, well, if the food is ad lib, and if a piglet isn't getting food, it just go in the night time and eat. No, it doesn't. Okay. They like to eat together. When they're on mother, they eat together. When they're weaned, they like to eat together. And if there isn't space for them to eat together, they just do without, possibly. Again, I come back to my point. The pig's motivation to maximally eat is not necessarily the same as what the farmer would like. Okay, so we have these definite patterns of feeding which we need to take into account when it comes to system. So here we have a couple of systems which I would say are good. We've got you know, a lovely clean environment here. You know, batch management. These pigs are all nice and warm. They're not huddling. They nicely settled. It's lovely and clean. You've got your feeders in the foreground here, and you've got, these aren't wet feeders, but they do have the water nipple system right next door to where the dry feed is, so that they get water and feed at the same time. There's plenty of access, and they can see each other eating, and that's all good. What this picture over this side demonstrates is that these types of feeders are designed also not just to go in the middle of the pen, but also to go between pens. And what this does is actually stimulates pigs to eat, okay? Because what happens is, it's like human nature. Once the pigs start eating here in this pen, the pigs in the other pen see them eating and think, oh, I want a bit of that. I'll go and get that, okay? And so this competitive behavior actually stimulates the individual pig to get up and eat, okay? So the idea that they can see each other eating is a good one, okay? It means that they can see each other eating, and the competition is there, and they will be stimulated to do that, okay? So if we have a look at these four pictures, do all the pigs in these pens get food? Well, if I go around and add a few thoughts on this as we go. This top picture, great, absolutely fantastic, great big hopper, loads of space, all the pigs can eat at the same time early on. Obviously, as they get bigger, then they get less space, but by the time they get big, that doesn't matter. The issue you might find in this pen, it's a lovely clean pen and everything else, is the size of that hopper. And people might be tempted to fill that at weaning with food. Well, remember, these pigs are only eating 100, 200, 300 grams a day when they're first weaned. If you put 6, 8 bags of food in those hoppers, it will be in there for 3 weeks and it will go off and stale. So you want lots of feeding space, but you don't want to fill up the hoppers so the food goes off. So it's a little and often. Put these high quality diets into the hopper as and when needed. But all in all, not a bad system. Here's an outdoor system with, I know, 60, 70 pigs in that ark there. Is the feeding space inside that ark enough? You know, even though we have outdoor systems with straw and they can get in the soil and root about and do all that behavioural stuff, are they really all getting access to the feeder that's in there? I don't know, I can't see the feeder. Here we have a wet feeding system, so you've got a pipe here filling the trough, and that might be filling it sort of more than once a day, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day. And again, a long trough, giving pigs access. This one, well, I'll let you make your own minds up on this one. Is that good? Are all those pigs getting food? You know, the hopper's there, ad libitum. The diet's probably a very good diet, but I suspect some of these pigs are not actually getting food. And if they have to fight for food, and if they find it a chore, and if they find it difficult, they won't maximize their intake. Okay, they will just sit at the back and maybe take the chances when they can, and then their overall intake will be down. So yeah, look at your system on a pragmatic point of view and just see what is happening. So in terms of feeder space, I've got again 3. I've got the one in the middle there that's basically I would suggest is not really working very well. This one, crikey, this slide here is 40 years old. This is an old flat deck, 10 pigs in a pen, fully slatted. This trough here is long enough for 10 pigs to eat together at the same time, and you'll notice a very small amount of food is placed in there, so it's not going off. And although this was probably 3 weeks in, in week 0, in the first week, we only used to put in a small cupful or a thimbleful, an egg cupful, okay, and we used to go in there 3 or 4 times a day, feeding the pigs a very small amount on a very repetitive basis, trying to mimic the way the sow feeds the pigs. They all come to eat, they eat what's there, it all goes, and then they come back again, and there it is again at a later date, okay? So that's trying to make this transition from the sow's behavior, feeding behavior, to post-weaning feeding behavior, okay? But all the way through in those pens, then there was space for all the piglets to eat. On this slide, we've got a good long trough, so there's plenty of space, so that's not a problem. And also this demonstrates water. You know, if you know, you might have nipple drinkers in there, but during that process of weaning, make sure there's a decent supply of water, so they get access to that as well. You know, 1 or 2 nipples perhaps is not enough for those days when they've just been weaned. So here we've got a turkey feeder, a turkey drinker, sorry, and there it is available. The only comment I might make on this trough is there's possibility that the trough is a bit too big in terms of capacity, and you might get some feed wastage up in these corners. So again, when you've got young pigs just weaned, get the food clean, okay? You can't, because these weaning diets are full of milk powder and fish meal and all those wonderful things that go off very quickly, okay? So don't overfill the hopper, okay? Make sure all the food is eaten, and before you then put some new in, because moldy feed is about the worst thing you can do. So we've thought about a lot about feeding. What about the environment? We need the temperature to be at least 28 degrees, okay? It doesn't matter whether the pig is young, big, old, small, you need to crank up the temperature. Why? You may have seen this before, but this is a classic sort of thermal neutral zone diagram. Basically, the upper line is the upper critical temperature, and the lower line is lower critical temperature. Between these, the animal is happy. So what you get is early on, the piglets are growing, okay, and they can have a range of temperature here. The point is, at weaning, the intake goes down to very low level. Now, when a pig eats, or when animals eat, the actual process of digesting the food creates heat. So that heat is available to heat the body. If the intake goes down to very little or 0, then the heat production from digestion goes to 0, and therefore they don't produce as much body heat naturally as they would normally do, and therefore they need to have the environmental temperature to be a lot higher. So immediately you wean a pig, whether, as I say, whatever age you wean a pig, its critical temperature is going to go, press the wrong button, is going to go up, okay? It will quickly come down again, okay? But you need to have these really good temperatures. So within, I don't know, 3 weeks post-weaning, that temperature 28 should be down to about 24. Space, absolutely, 0.25 meters on a fully slatted floor, probably 0.35 if you're on a floor where you've got a straw lying area and a dunging channel. Ad lib feed and water, absolutely, we'll talk a lot about that. Avoid mixing if you can at weaning. Mixing is one of the stressors, so if you can do mixing differently, then that's important. I'll come on to that. Group size, what is the optimum group size? Well, 10 is nice because that might be a litter. 10 is not good if you're commercially trying to have pens, straw-based pens, and you need to have pens of 50 just to make the pen big enough to manage their, the group and the mucking system. So I would say, what we have is pens of 25 on slats. I wouldn't go much above 100. These very large groups of 200 pigs, particularly at weaning, I think the little ones get lost in there somewhere. And very much all in, all out batch management. What I mean is when you move a bunch of pigs, you wean a bunch of pigs, wean them into a clean environment, keep them safe, and then when you wean the next batch of pigs, wean them into some, another place. Don't mix pigs of different batches if you can. Then moving on in terms of weaning and your overall objectives, sow productivity, really important. Reproduction efficiency, condition score at weaning is really important, so we don't want to overdo. The picture here is a fantastic sow. She's had 12 pigs. I think she's about 3 weeks in, and they're all sort of getting up for 9, 10 kilos. So, that's fantastic at 3 weeks. You imagine that sow with that litter after 5 weeks. The sow might be getting a little bit ragged, okay? Maybe the other function has gone, a few teats have been damaged, whatever. So we've got to think about the sow and also this idea that if she's giving everything into those piglets, she may be losing weight. Longevity, size, agility, the udder and teat functionality. So, piglets can be quite damaging to udders, and we've just got to think about that. So that sort of leads into this idea of what is the optimizing the weaning age. Well, what is the best weaning age? Well, here's a sort of summary of different weaning ages. Naturally, sows will wean themselves at 10 to 16 weeks. Okay. In the EU, as I said earlier, the rule is 28 days, but if they're batch weaned into clean environment, you can go at 21 days. USA, anytime, doesn't matter, there's no rules, often 10 days. I understand those systems because when I started pig farming 40 years ago, we were on, there wasn't any restriction. We were weaning at day 10. Okay, so it can be done as long as you look after the pigs, put them in a nice environment, and give them the right diet, then it can be done. And the reason why it's done is to get the sow back into the reproductive cycle, and you get a more efficient sow and piglet production. I was involved in some studies, a big national study looking at 4, 6 and 8 week weaning across indoors and outdoor pigs. And the idea was if you wean the pig at 8 weeks, the piglet, it might get off to a better start and therefore get to slaughter quicker. That was not the case, okay? The age at slaughter was no different whether you wean them at 4 weeks or 8 weeks, okay? They still take a little bit of a check at 8 weeks, and because you wean them at 4 weeks, so long as you've got the right diet, okay? You can't take a 4-week pig and give it a grower diet. It's not going to work, okay? Similarly, you can't take an 8-week pig that should be on a grower diet if you weaned it at 4 weeks and give it a grower diet. You still need to give that 8-week pig a good diet at weaning, just for those first few days to see it through the weaning process. Okay, in the 6-week group, the sows lost a lot of condition, and that really did put them back. So we were having rebreeding problems when we were weaning at 6 weeks. An annual sow output of the 8-week treatment was down by 4 pigs per sow per year, and again that was a major financial implication. Okay. The main message I took from that trial was at all ages and weights, pigs take a drop at weaning, okay? And high quality diets are needed. Maybe a little less of it if you're weaning later, but you still need to put a good diet in. And then finally, there is a system called, I haven't got the slides on this one, I could perhaps cover them at the end, but there's a family pen system where the pigs are never weaned and they live together with their mothers and the boards and everything lives together. So that was an interesting system to perhaps think about later. So how do we reduce this weaning stress? Okay, I mentioned before the stressors, mixing them, moving them, taking mother away, and diet change. Mixing litters prior to weaning, we'll call it multi-suckling. This is something people can do, works very well in my opinion. We've had various studies on it. We had a whole PhD looking at this sort of stuff. So here we have 3 litters together. The boards have been lifted and all the piglets joined together, and you've now got sort of 30 to 36 pigs all in the same group, which means that when those pigs are weaned, they then go into a pen for 36. Here's another example of doing it in a commercial farm. And then here's one, there's in the farrowing crate, and here's one where the sows have been removed and put into an open pen. And again, 5 sows mixed in there with 50 piglets for a couple of weeks and then weaned. Okay, so multi-suckling, it's a great idea, but again, has to be managed. There is a check at mixing the first time. You might get a little bit more mortality, particularly in this system here. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And piglets getting squashed if the sows have a bit of a get together and a fight. Bullet points, by mixing them prior to weaning, you remove the need to mix them at weaning. Best done in mid-lactation, absolutely. If you go too early, the piglets are too young. If you go, say, 7 days before weaning, they get a double hit. They haven't got used to the idea, or they get a hit at mixing whilst they're lactating, okay, and then they get another hit at weaning if it's 7 days. So it's very much right in the middle lactation. If you mix the piglets, then you can reduce the aggression and the fighting at weaning. And then also to aid management, what we use the system for very much is when we've got our very big litters and we need extra sort of space to deal with litters. We've got too many pigs for the sows we've got. We will multi-suckle some sows, and then the group of pigs will be bigger than the 3 sows can cope with, and within that system we have milk and creep and everything else just to allow, it's like a nursery pen. Okay, so multi-suckling is something to think about. Okay, litter penning, sure, take your litter, put it in a pen together, never mix it. Okay, the problem with that, the obvious problem is that if you've got lots of pigs, lots of litters to wean, you've got pens of 10 or 12 or whatever, and you've got very small pens and lots of them. So at some point they've got to be mixed. My biggest thing on mixing piglets at weaning is make sure that you mix the weaned group size is the same as the group size you need in your finishing unit. Okay, so you never mix after weaning. So you mix at weaning, you maybe establish your pen of 25, and then when you move from the weaner accommodation to the finishing accommodation, the pen of 25 stays the same. Okay, what you don't want to do is have pens of 20 in your weaner accommodation and then have pens of 30 in your finishing accommodation, because then it doesn't work. Leave piglets in the farrowing pen. This one people think about saying, oh, that's a good idea. No, it's not. Okay. The problem with leaving the piglets in the farrowing pen, sure, they are used to that environment. You take the mother away, and what happens? They sit there thinking, when's mum coming back? Oh, when's mum coming back? I'll wait a couple of hours and mum will come back. 2 hours later, mum's not back. Oh, I'll wait a bit longer. I'm getting a bit hungry now. Is there a feed in here? Oh yeah, I'll go and find the feed. I might have a bit. Oh, I don't really taste that. And that big one over there, that's standing over the feed hopper. The piglet is still stressed at weaning. It's lost its mother. And the point is, now it is in a dirty farrowing pen. So it's not even a clean environment. So when we've done that before in trials, again, we've got the evidence, it just does not work. So when you wean the pig, get it into a new clean environment. In fact, I'm going so far as to say, moving it into a new environment, it actually stimulates the animal. It stimulates to say, oh, this is a new pen. What do I do in here? Oh, there's the feeder. Oh, that smells quite nice. I'll have a bit of that. Okay. And that's how it goes. Okay. So actually changing the environment does stimulate the animal to do the behaviours that you might want. Keeping back nurse sows for smalls, again, lots and lots of people do it. I've done it myself in the past. In 3-week batch management, it's not really on. It's difficult to manage and can't really do it because we don't have sows farrowing all the time. And to be honest, when I've looked at weaning and this weaning process, and particularly in the multi-suckling sort of situation, just wean them. Just get them weaned. They will take the hit, the same hit as they're going to take anyway when they're weaned. what makes you think if they're not doing very well on one sow, what makes you think they're going to do well on another sow? Okay, get them weaned, but put them in a really nice pen. Give them the milk, the liquids, the everything else, and get them going through weaning would be my advice anyway. And then definitely get creep feed in. Put creep feed into the system, okay, from day 14. Solid food is going to help them go through weaning. In terms of pen selection, I'm getting to probably run out of time now, sorry about that. Minimize mixing, okay. So think about the group size. I've talked about that, I won't go over that again. Group the pigs in the same as the finishing pens. I've said that already. I'm getting ahead of myself. Split sex. If you're big enough and you can feed differently in your finishing unit, then split sexing is good. Feeding boars and sows differently is going to save you some money, but do it at weaning. Why not? Group by size if you can. Okay. Smalls, mediums, and larges. Again, you should be feeding smalls, mediums, and larges differently through the finishing unit. So get those groups established early on, and then you don't have to mix them up later on. What else? Oh yeah, smalls pen. You got, again, look after those little pigs. You know, we wean 400 every batch, and we probably have about a dozen or half a dozen little pigs that really do need a lot of help. Okay, so it needs to be warm, dry, ability to wet feed, Mexican hat things, put liquid milk in 3, 4, 5 times a day, gruel, all these sorts of things are going to help those early weaned pigs. Pen preparation, absolutely get them clean, okay, clean and time, okay, you need 7 days. The thing needs to be clean, disinfected, dried, and what we do is for an extra go, disinfect it again and dry it again, okay. That kills the bugs, okay. You can't beat time for killing bugs. Create a good climate, okay. This one here, this building here, this is designed for outdoor born pigs. They all come in here, 1,000 piglets will come into this building all in one day. And what have they done? They've put an extra cover over to generate a much more warm little climate for those piglets when they're first weaned. Okay, so put in the extra effort to create the right climate, nice and warm, and no drafts. Drafts are bad news. Okay, and barley straw is good for weaned pigs. And again, water. Make sure if you don't get the water, you don't get the food intake. So get the water in there and make sure the flow rate. So check the flow rate. And as I showed earlier, if you got the youngest pigs, you know, put in extra water troughs just for those first few days, so they've got no excuse for not getting to the water. Although you should have nipple drinkers in your farrowing house, so your piglets should be used to the idea of where and how to get water. So at weaning, vaccinate the piglets as necessary. There's a good one. Leave the lights on. Okay. Remember, the sows on the piglets on the sow feed throughout the day. They don't have the diurnal pattern. So if you can keep the lights on and let the pigs think, oh, this is, you know, permanent day, it means they will continue that sort of regular feeding pattern through the weaning process. Okay. So leave the lights on. Okay. So they get a good opportunity to get up to the feeder, and then you know, before they start establishing this very strict sort of diurnal pattern of feed. Stimulate activity, just walk in amongst them, just go in amongst them, go in the room, shake, you know, make some noise, stimulate them, get them up. You know, I've said 3 times there, 4, 5, 6 times. Get in there, stimulate them, they all stand up, whoa, and then they go to the feed and have some food. Plenty of feeding space, as I say, for the tiny weaned little pigs. Make sure they've got at least 5 centimetres per pig when they're first weaned, so they can all roughly get to the feeder at the same time. And again, plenty of water. In conclusion, whatever weaning age, weight, or system, okay, the pig faces these challenges, and you can elucidate what are the main stressors in your particular system, okay, and And if you knock them all on the head, then you're going to help your performance, your health, and obviously if you're helping your health, you're going to help your welfare. Feed intake is the critical thing. Get the food into them. That's the thing that really puts pigs back when they're weaned. The poor doers, if you like, they don't eat, and then they get sick. It's a transition, okay, physiology and behavior. I've tried to get that across. And the individual's piglet's motivation is not necessarily to do what the owner wants them to do.